All right, good evening, everybody. Is I, Nick, Pennsylvania, here, as I am, as always, with the Brandano. How you doing, Brendan?
I'm doing excellent, buddy. How are you doing tonight?
Really good, really good. We have gotten so many comments and just some nice things being bandied about from our recent. We had Elizabeth and Erica, the sisters, collectively make up Spirits Uncorked.
Hmm.
And just I can't say enough, like what a fun time that was sitting down and conversing with them. And it sent me down a rabbit hole, and I was listening to some of their episodes,
Hmm.
and they have quite the connection. Their grandmother they were interviewing, which one, that's just fun. But
Yeah.
there was and I don't want to screw the name up, but I remember reading a book about like a teenage kind of spree killing, and
Hmm.
they have a very personal connection to that, and that was just it was wild. So I've been really enjoying listening to that. I know, as you said, it's not going to be the first and only time we speak with them, but thanks to everybody that kind of put out some comments on that. It was just really refreshing, and now that we've been out of it a couple weeks since that conversation, I'm
Hmm.
curious, is what are some things you've taken away? What are some things that have lingered with you since that conversation?
Yeah. So I think like one, because you mentioned working through the back catalog, I'm kind of doing that as well right now. This episode that you are listening to now will come out in the future. It'll come out, if all goes according to plan, on the 8th. Today, on Friday the 6th, we actually published one of their episodes on our feed. So you all got a bonus episode this week. So really excited to see how all of you respond to that. And like Nick said, if you're enjoying those things, please go listen to their episodes on their feed and follow them on the socials and everything. But it's funny the feedback I got from one of my friends, which I always think is like a huge compliment, is like she said it sounded like you guys were all just sitting around having a good time, and I was like, that is exactly what was happening,
I was
which is
definitely
first
having a good time. I
like,
will say that I listened to it afterwards because if you haven't heard it, I definitely drank about half a bottle of a Merlot that had been sitting in my fridge for a while. And I'm gonna tell you what, it started to hit me, and I'm pretty sure at some point I recited my social security number, and you were like, "I will make sure that's."
we
I didn't go
will
that
edit
far, but
that
I
out.
said some
Yeah.
things, and afterwards I'm like, "Brendan, I think I might have said this. Can we redact that?" And you're like, "I have you covered." I thought
Yeah.
that was kind of weird that you said that, but no,
Which
that
is,
was it was a really good
yeah,
time.
yeah. No, it was a lot of fun. And it's just like I mean, we've been so lucky with the folks that we've had on this show. Um,
Yes.
over the years. It's so rare in life that you meet people and just like click like that. But like that's happened with Thomas White, Tim Grieve Carlson, that happened with Brennan Storr, that happened with
Got to
Tim
go
Renner.
hiking with Tim
Yeah.
Reeves.
Yeah, and it's just like you like it's just I don't know, we've been so lucky with getting to meet people
Yeah.
who are just so like-minded, and it's so effortless to talk about weird stuff,
Well, and I got to
you
tell you,
know?
one of the people that you brought, one of the authors that we were able to interview that I've been
Hmm.
thinking about for a while now, and I feel awful. I can't remember her name right now, but you're gonna let me know. There was that lady who wrote folklore and some historical pieces about her state of Maryland.
Yeah, so
And
Susan
oh boy,
Fair.
wasn't
Yeah.
she just like she had just such I mean, the research that she had done was great, but
Hmm.
what just she's just it was so peaceful talking to her.
Right. Some people are just so good at telling stories and getting ideas
Yeah.
across. But yeah, no, that is Susan Fair, and when she was on one of our episodes, I
Susan
guess
Fair. She was great.
about
I've
two
been
years
thinking
ago.
about her. I've
Well,
been thinking about
I've
her.
actually been talking with her. We're hopefully going to get her back on an episode in April or May. So me and her have been chatting about that. So
Well, I
hopefully we'll
hope
have her
she
back on
hears
soon.
that. I
I
hope
hope so
she hears
too.
that.
I hope so
Because
too.
I remember we were talking about, she told a story, and you'll have to go back and listen to our interview with Miss Susan Fair. And we were talking about, the story is the story, but then there's what the story's really trying to convey,
Hmm. Right.
surreptitiously trying to
Yes.
convey.
Yes.
And that was, again, I've been thinking about that conversation recently.
Hmm.
So as far as some of the other things that we've gotten, I got an email the other day and I wanted to read it because there's some book recommendations. I don't think you've read
Oh,
it,
this
but
no, this is the one that I haven't responded to yet. I just as soon as you said that, I realized I
I
have it on my
responded
list.
to it
Okay,
because I'm pretty sure
thank
it
you.
was something I said.
Yeah, no, because I read it and was like, I need to formulate a thoughtful response to this, and it's been sitting there since like Tuesday,
Well,
so
I'll
I'll get
I'll
back to
read
that.
this letter.
Yeah.
It was email. It was
Hmm.
nice. It came in. It came in a few days ago, and it just says it's from a guy named Dave. So thank you, Dave, for writing. Hope you read my response and given that some, you know, give that some thought. But Dave writes, "Hey guys, just found the podcast and really like it so far. Started with episode 140 about werewolves slash dogmen, and really like your logical approach in looking at people's stories. So thank you.
Hmm.
Moving on though, here it comes. But in episode 141, one of you said something about how ghost stories are only Victorian times onward. Wow. Not true, not true at all. So not true. There are lots of examples of ghost stories before that, and as people who claim to be interested in folklore, you should know that. So let me pause there. I and when I responded, I'm almost certain that was something I said. And in my response, I said, I think the flippant comment I made or have made several times is something more along the lines of, it seems like they stopped making Ghost after the Victorian era, which is obviously also wildly inaccurate. But no, point taken. I do think it was something I said. I haven't listened to episode 141 since it came out, so I'll have to go back. But I feel like that's something I've said along the lines of a few times, and
Right. No, Dave is 100% correct. We
it
have absolutely said
100%
that.
accurate.
And what we should probably do, honestly, though, Nick, is do a deep dive into that concept because really what we're talking about whenever we make that flippant comment, um, because really it is, it's just, yeah, we're literally just making fun of nothing when we say that.
Right.
Um, but what we're really talking about is in the Victorian era, this is what influences the spiritualist movement. You have intellectuals starting to look at a lot of these folkloric traditions and everything. That's where you have a lot of the Nordic stuff gets really kind of like reanalyzed, a lot of the Germanic stuff, and a lot of what we think today about like the history of certain things. Like whenever you all hear about like, oh, how Christmas is just a pagan tradition, like that idea came from the Victorian era, which was kind of like a reallocation of like really only a few folklorists and historians. Um, that's something we should honestly have Thomas White back on to talk about, because not that he's necessarily an expert on that era, but there is more to that conversation than just us being
I will
dismissive.
say, when I
Yeah.
said that, I wasn't thinking all of that. It was
No, you
much more
weren't. But
surface
that
level.
would be a good episode, though. But yeah, no. But please get to the rest of Dave's email because he has some other
Yes.
great things to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he says, going on back to Dave's email now, I'll recommend a book by Claude Lecoteau, The Return of the Dead, in which he looks at many old ghost stories. Interestingly, his theory is that ghosts used to be thought of as solid, physical beings
Hmm.
that fought, ate, slept, etc. In the Icelandic sagas, for example, you often had to wrestle, fight, or pick up a sword and fight a ghost. Anyway, in his
Hmm.
theory, the Christian church began turning ghosts into vaporous, misty, walk through walls and disappear ghosts that we now know, so that they could be explained away as mental illness, etc. Anyway, a great book about pre Christian ghost sightings and ghosts versus what they later became.
Hmm.
All of his books are good, by the way. And then just keep up the great podcast, and I'll be making my way through the episodes. No idea why I started at number 140, but the dog thing sounded interesting. So, again, thank you, Dave, and I always appreciate a good book recommendation, and that is by Claude Lecoteau, the Return of the Dead. Interestingly enough,
Hmm.
I I had a couple days of running reports, and I was on the road for work today, and I was listening. I have Audible, and it was just like a 5 hour long ghost story. I downloaded because it was free, and I
Nice.
needed something refreshing, and it was a lot more engaging of a story than I thought it would be. Because for me, many ghost stories are like soul food. It is deeply satisfying.
Hmm.
It hits the spot. You feel full, but it's not always the best thing for you. This was very well written and
Hmm.
engaging, and it was a haunted house story, but it had a little more going on to it. And they did in this story have to fight off a ghost that it would disappear, but it also
Hmm.
could wield objects
Which is
and
cool.
hurt.
Yeah.
And it killed a rat at one point. I won't say anymore, but you're the one with the stories today. What are you bringing to the table tonight? You said something to me earlier about Presque Isle, but then you said coming back to a place we've talked a bit about out
Hmm.
to Bellefonte area of Pennsylvania's Center County, right outside of State College, not the greatest named town in the Commonwealth, but it is known as State College because, of course, that is where Pennsylvania State University is. What's going on, Brendan?
So yeah, so we kind of got two things tonight, like you mentioned. The first one has to do with Presque Isle. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Commonwealth, Presque Isle is this little peninsula up in Erie that juts into Lake Erie. I'm sure we've mentioned Presque Isle and Misery Bay previously, but it's a state park. It has some beaches and everything. It's a really beautiful location, but also like a pretty weird place. It sees our friend Christian Alexanderson from Hemlocks to Hellbenders would probably know better, but I think it is the most visited state park in all of the Commonwealth. So it gets a lot of traffic. So as a result, there's a lot of weirdness up there, and it's been a state park for a long time. And I was talking to one of my good friends recently, and he asked me if I was familiar with a Bigfoot and UFO flap on Presque Isle back in the 60s. And I was like, absolutely not. Please tell me everything you know about it. And he unfortunately didn't know a whole lot, but he's like, I just heard that there was something back in the 60s. I was like, you know what? I haven't heard about it, but we're always finding new stuff. That's for darn sure. So,
Well, and I was thinking about it when you brought it up to me just a little bit ago, and
hmm.
I don't know if this is in connection to that, but I remember being at there's a great maritime museum up in
Hmm.
Erie, PA, right next to one of my favorite restaurants the world over, which is the Oyster Bar, right up
Hmm.
on the bay there in Erie. I remember having a conversation with one of the guys there that was giving us a tour and
Hmm.
even brought us down into the workroom and showed us they were building a mast for one of these three-masted ships.
Hmm.
Really, really cool. But he said something about ghost lights
Yeah.
many years ago. And I think he said he grew up in the Midwest, I think Indiana, but he said it was before he moved to Erie, which was in the early
Hmm.
80s. But I was wondering if that could have anything to do with that, and if this is a related story, if this is somebody remembering the story or interpreting
Hmm.
the stories differently.
So, so I did some research and I came across, I believe, what is the like impetus for this for this story. Um, So there really isn't necessarily, I wouldn't call it a Bigfoot and UFO flap in Erie in the 60s, but there is a really prominent, looks to be pretty prominent story about a UFO sighting in correlation with a possible Bigfoot sighting on Presque Isle in the 60s. Um, and so I kind of want to talk about that first before talking about just UFOs in general in Presque Isle, because there's a bunch of them. Um, but so there's kind of two parts to this. Um, there's the UFO sighting, and then there's the Bigfoot sighting. So for the UFO sighting portion, I was actually able to find the actual Project Blue Book entry, which
Yeah.
for those of you who aren't aware, Project Blue Book was a at the time, I believe, Department of Air Force project that basically looked into the efficacy of UFO sightings.
If there's any question about legitimacy, if you
Mhm,
find it in Blue Book, and Blue Book went or did a good job of being able to find rational, likely explanations, and I think most everything they were able to explain in a way that made sense is totally
mhm,
natural and identifiable occurring things, but I think there were a handful that they struggled with. But the bottom line is, if you're skeptical about any claims and you find it in this whole Blue Book thing, like this was a very serious, no nonsense sort of operation.
mhm.
So it doesn't get any more critical, I don't believe.
Right, right. So what I kind of want to do here is talk about the what we have here is this is July 31st, 1966. And what we have is we have tourists from New York State on Presque Isle, specifically at Beach 6. On the northern side of the island, there's a bunch of beaches. This is on the sixth one. So it's kind of near the lighthouse, which is kind of famous, but it's a little up from there. But Jared LaBelle, who was the driver of this vehicle, got his car stuck and in the sand, which is a lot of sand up there. They were basically told just to kind of like hang out and everything because they were like, well, we're stuck in the sand, tow truck's on the way, whatever. So as they're kind of sitting there and everything, you eventually have some policemen from Erie swing by around 10 p.m. and see that they're stuck. They stop, have a conversation with them. They say there's a tow truck coming, no big deal, and they say they'll check back later just to make sure they're on their way getting out of there and whatnot. Now, when they come back about an hour later, the tow truck hadn't showed up yet. And when they were talking to the witnesses, one of them said that something weird was going on over there and pointed to a location above one of the wood lines. Like if you're on the island and everything, it's funny because Presque Isle is like weird because some of it is it's like kind of like always shifting and changing.
Yeah, we've invested a lot of money in the Commonwealth to try
Yeah.
to prevent that, but it's kind of
Hmm.
a losing battle.
It kind of is. Yeah. But there is some like forested parts of this peninsula. And what they said was they saw over these trees, which probably would have been to the northeast of where they were at, is that something weird's going on up there above this wooded area. And one of the group members, this is Douglas Tibbets, went to investigate along with the two officers. So I'm actually going to switch now over to the actual Blue Book because we're talking about the course of the object here. So the Blue Book says this. This is the section called Course of Object. I'm gonna make this bigger so I can see it. We get pretty good at reading old typeface stuff, but sometimes it is just not easy.
Oh, I remember there were a lot of Dr. Pennsylvania
Right.
episodes we did when I was reading newspapers from the 19th and even a couple from the 18th century,
Yeah.
and having to remember the rules about a long S, which is when you
Hmm.
see where it sometimes looks like there's an F. That's a long
Yeah.
S. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of rules about when to use a long S. And it made, ugh, that it's just in preservation of the dude. All
Yeah.
right, carry
So
on.
so this is the in the Blue Book report. This is the course of object section. You know what? Let me actually read the description of object first because it's like some of this old stuff is just like cool because it's like terms we don't necessarily always use anymore. So description. There are 8 points. Square or hexagonal in air tumbling. Compared to a $50 just before touchdown or a little bigger. Couldn't see the edges either, lit up or reflecting. Circle of spotlights on the top when on the ground. Soft buzz or hum heard for about 3 seconds later, described as a groan or turbine sound, decreasing as in speed and pitch, stopped abruptly as objects settle on sand. So the course of this object is this. Car stuck in sand. Observer watching sky through windshield and noticed bright star. Looking back seconds later, the object appeared to be free falling, about 45 degrees above the horizon, north of the observers. So this would have been, yeah, like north, looking up the peninsula towards
Yeah,
Canada.
towards the open Lake Erie.
Open, yeah, open lake and everything. So they were on the ground level, and this was, yeah, northeast of the observers. Object appeared to fall nearly straight down from left to right, approximately north to south. Total time to ground was 3 to 5 seconds. Tumbled as it fell, exhibiting appearance of a cube or hexagonal shape with edges visible as lights or reflections. It stopped suddenly, 5 to 10 feet above the beach behind bushes. Red light blinked on, then off, and objects settled heavily onto the beach. No sound of hitting sand. All three adult occupants felt the vibration as it hit or touched. Immediately, several strong, small spotlights came on, seemingly arranged in a circle around the top, estimated to be 10 to 15 feet above the ground. Circle of lights moved around as individual beams showed on the sand and trees. Appeared to be among trees close to edge of beach and woods. Edge of light beams seemed very sharp. As police drove car up from rear to check on stuck car, police turned on blinker and lights from object disappeared, and it could not be seen. See Part K for further happenings. So that's the description of the object in the course of the object. Any initial thoughts on that?
No. I mean, this is 1968, you say?
66.
66. Okay. So, I mean, the very first thing I go to was so much of these phenomenon in that time. Like, I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
about Kecksburg. I'm thinking about the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about US and Canada relations during that. Now, Canada was still part of the United Kingdom at that time until
Mm-hmm.
1982, I do believe, was when, regardless, an ally. I know I'm kind of reaching at straws here, but the bottom line is, I think the most likely explanation in my mind has something to do with the Cold War. It seems like doing
Mm-hmm.
tests or something over the lake is probably a good idea. It seems likely. I wonder where there's an Air Force or a Navy base nearby, but I figure there must be one. I'm just not very knowledgeable on these things. Like I know very well the air base in like Dover,
Mm-hmm.
um, Delaware, but not much else.
Right, right. When we look at the comments of the preparing officer, I'm gonna go ahead and read these. So this is like the U.S. Air Force personnel who's doing this report. Of the three adult witnesses, I was able to talk to only the male and obtain statements from the two police officers who arrived on scene, statements from the news editor who was called in by the chief of police in addition to patrolmen who were taken. The general impression is that the witnesses were fairly level-headed but obviously frightened. Miss Clem was described as being very, and we'll get to her citing here, her part of this in a little bit here when we get to the Bigfoot part. Ms. Clem was described as being very nearly in a state of shock, but rapidly regained control of herself when taken to the park administration office. Listening to the conversation of those present in the initial interview, there appear to be discrepancies in Mr. and Mrs. Tibbetts' statements. The witnesses appeared credible. He did state affirmative answer to one questionnaire who asked if he was a policeman. He was wearing a borrowed jacket at the time. It was early morning. This could have been caused to the lack of desire of being questioned by curiosity seekers. Physical evidence. The physical evidence is questionable. I like how they say that in here. The physical evidence is questionable. Two rectangular marks found in the sand, see attached number 1, were photographed and a plaster of Paris cast made by the Pennsylvania State Police. There is no evidence to actually relate these marks to the sighting. These marks were obviously made by an angular, flat, slightly concaved object pointed slightly down and pushed into the sand as evidenced by firmly packed bottom surface sand pushed up in a crater-like ridge around the edge and penetrated this at an angular surface about 4 to 5 inches below the surface of the sand. Maximum cast was made with top even with average surface of the sand, not as deep as pushed up the ridge. Basically saying that the most striking feature of these marks was their similarity being very nearly identical, except for their direction. So, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes and everything, so you all can see the diagrams and the photos and the notes and everything.
Yeah, will you throw that link up for me real quick
Yeah,
so I can take
absolutely.
a butcher's at it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what doesn't make it into the report, because it is presumably too weird, is what Betty Clem and Anita Halafi stated to reporters after the fact because this didn't, and this apparently was stated to the officers, but didn't make it into the, again, Blue Book reports. So
By the way, this is very difficult to kind of see what's going on here.
it is. Yeah, it's because it is. It's a report, not a story. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You have to kind of. That's why I'm kind of piecing stuff together. But so what they said was the two women of the group, Betty Clem and Anita Haffney, remained in the car and waited for everyone to return. Again, like we said, Tibbets and the officers walked roughly 300 yards up the beach before hearing the honking from the car's horn, hurrying back to see what happened. They found Clem and Haffney clearly shaken and said they witnessed a dull black shape bigger than a man, big head and shoulders, arm-like appendages with no hands or no face visible, as though it had its back turned. In front of their car, it lumbered into the bushes, and that's when Clem blew the horn, notifying the officers and Tibbets to come back. So they, while waiting, so basically, while these folks were looking at a UFO, a possible UFO sighting, a Bigfoot showed up too, is what it seems like.
Truly bizarre, but for those people that think that Bigfoot is an alien,
Right,
you're
right.
welcome.
Yeah, and it's what the officers said is that whenever they wrote their reports, they said they have no reasonable explanation for the UFO, even though they describe the witnesses as credible, and also say that there is no direct correlation between Mrs. Clem's sightings and the UFO. So I do like that the officers called that out in 1966, being like, "Hey, just so we're being clear, like that, it almost seems like even then they didn't want to sully the UFO with a Bigfoot report, which I think is interesting." So that was like a very interesting thing for me to find because I don't think I've ever heard this story. Um,
Well, I've never heard that story. And
mhm.
again, that it's in Project Blue Book is interesting. What I'm curious, I do have a question, but it really goes back to the thing we laugh about Stan Gordon, where he says, "I'm not saying
Yeah.
Bigfoot and aliens are connected, but it seems that wherever you get sightings of one, you often get sightings of the
Hmm.
other."
Right.
Um, so if that didn't make it into the report, into Blue Book, where did that last
That
tidbit
comes
come
from the
from?
act that comes from the actual officers' reports,
Okay.
The Pennsylvania State Police officers.
So
Yeah.
again, a credible source, even though it's not that they aren't open to misinterpreting
Hmm.
things. It's not as though they were viewing that story as credible themselves, but they are documenting it in real time. And
What they're saying is this is what she said she
right,
saw, and she seems credible. Like they're not making, it doesn't seem like they're making, just like the Blue Book. I mean, it's fine. Like the Blue Book one, like they are making judgments in that. They're saying, but that's kind of what they're tasked to do, like you mentioned,
right.
which is
The state
understandable.
troopers are just trying to document.
Right, precisely. It's a pretty interesting case that I had never heard of before. And again,
I
it's always
will,
fun when you can find these like original
yeah.
documents
I
too.
will say these. How young were these people on the beach?
You know what? I don't know if I saw that anywhere. That's probably in the report. This it's
Because
probably in the PA State Police report. Let me see
August
if it's in here.
1966, LSD is still legal.
That is true. Yeah, that could
And
have been.
I'm not being flippant. I am a little bit, but honestly,
See if it
you know,
says.
is that so crazy?
Right. No, it's not. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, it
Not
is
that
cool.
it being
Yeah,
illegal would mean
right.
that people couldn't still, but they probably wouldn't be
Wouldn't be as yeah,
right. You
as
getting what I'm saying there?
right, right. But yeah, no, it is fun just like reading these reports because like it's like yeah, they checked in with the air traffic control towers at Erie, and they checked in with the different army bases in Jamestown
Oh,
and
there's an army base, or
Greenhurst.
there was an army base in Jamestown, New
That's
York?
what it says. Yeah.
Huh. I
Yep.
guess there's Jamestown, PA, but let's be honest, Jamestown, PA, down by Greenville, PA, not a lot happened there. Jamestown,
Right.
New York, though, home of Lucille Ball.
Right. Exactly. That is their claim to fame. But so, yeah, whenever I was looking into this, I was like, well. because I wanted to see if there was an actual like flap, you know. And so I go in the two directions. I start looking for UFO reports and Bigfoot reports on Presque Isle, you know. So looking at UFO reports, I know we've linked to this database before, the NUFORC, which just rolls off the tongue.
And into the
Um,
heart.
yeah, National UFO Reporting Center. They have an interactive map and they have a ton of reports. It's a really well maintained database that actually gets scrubbed by members. And every time I find stuff that has been gone over, they're really thorough. They go in and say like, hey, there was a launch out of Buenos Aires this day, so this is probably just a rocket reentry capsule. Like it seems like a good source. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well tonight. But only one report on Presque Isle specifically from 2022, which I thought was interesting. I'm like, God, that can't be right. There has to be more. So then I looked at like Erie proper, which is all of, a quarter mile across Misery Bay, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of sightings from all over. So none of them go back to 1966. Unfortunately, the oldest ones in here go back into the late 90s. There is a ton of UFO reports. Now, one thing that I always think of when I see stuff like this though is anyone who has been to Lake Erie knows that Lake Erie has really, really fantastic sunsets. Have you ever been to Lake Erie on a sunset,
Agreed.
Nick? Yeah,
Of
it's
course
like
I have.
yeah, I figured, yeah, you know what's up.
I'm up there all the time. I
Yeah.
have to go there at least, even now, I have to go there at least once a month for work.
hmm And it's really beautiful. So as a result, this is a place where you get people standing around looking at the sky on a more regular basis. So it's to me stands to reason that there would be more UFO reports. That being said, there is a huge number on here of reports, and they're all over the place. Everything from flying discs to like just points of light, things breaking into other objects, flying black triangles, like everything, flying cylinders. So it is the whole gamut, at least, which I think is interesting. Hovering neon green circular sphere, like that's actually kind of interesting, you
That's a
know?
different
That's a different
take.
one, you know? So there's a lot of stuff. So not surprised at that, but I am gonna what I'm gonna do is I save this link and everything. I'm gonna look through and see if there's any trends and everything. Because like maybe Lake Erie is a hot spot. I wouldn't say there's any necessarily flaps. Like as far as again, when we say flap, we haven't covered this in our paranormal dictionary episode on UFOs yet. But when we do, we'll talk about flaps, which for those of you who aren't aware, a flap is whenever you have a lot of sightings of really any kind in an area in a short amount of time that seems anomalous. Most famously, that we talk about is the flap on the Chestnut Ridge area of Pennsylvania in the late 60s. Um, these flaps happen all over the place.
Well, I was
So,
thinking about there was well, it wasn't Santa Fe, but there were the lights in New Mexico.
oh yeah, well, there's just a lot of stuff down there in general. But yeah, no, there's been a few flaps in like the Sedona area that have been really, really popular over the years. And that's kind of why that place gets such a weird reputation. So yeah, nothing that goes back that far. I don't have access to MUFON stuff because it's behind a paywall, which is dumb. But yeah, so I couldn't find anything to corroborate that there was a flap in the 60s through any other databases either. So I think Erie just has a lot of UFO reports. But really, when I started to look at Bigfoot reports in Erie, whenever you look, there's some that come up for like Girard, which is south of Presque Isle, and there's some that there really aren't any that come up for Erie proper, let alone Presque Isle. So I'm pretty confident to say that there wasn't a flap in the 60s, but this one report is really, really strange. Um, because again, you have the correlation. We know correlation doesn't imply causation, but if you have people seeing a UFO, and even as they're investigating said UFO, folks see a 8 foot tall, dark humanoid walking out of the bushes, you can understand why people think it's a Bigfoot. So, so certainly interesting. So
Yeah.
while I was looking into that, I go on to BFRO, which regardless of what you think about BFRO, they are at least thorough
And they
in
are
their.
trying.
They're trying again, like, and they're trying. So I was looking at Erie and everything and didn't find anything. I was like, oh well, let me check on like recent PA. I'm already here. I'm already at the store.
Right.
Might as well pick up milk and eggs,
Don't
right?
know what else you don't need.
Right. So, um, I look at some of the recent stuff, and there is from back in November a Class A sighting in Center County, right outside of State College, right south of Bellefonte, right at almost the same location as the other two Bigfoot reports that we've talked about in the Fisherman's Paradise area.
Well, very quickly, in 10,000 words or fewer,
Hmm.
what is a class A? What denotes a
Yes.
class A?
So a Class A Bigfoot sighting is generally referred to when someone sees an actual creature that they can identify as a Bigfoot versus a Class B sighting, which is when someone hears sounds attributed to Bigfoot like whoops or chatter or wood knocks, things along those lines. Class B sightings are much more common. Class A sightings are significantly more rare. The ones that we've talked about on this show have been generally Class A sightings. Like when we talked about the I-80 Bigfoot sighting, there was a Class A that just happened back in, I think it was October maybe, that is at the northern tip of this ravine that we're talking about here. Um, that was a Class A sighting because two folks saw it run across the road. So yeah, this is a Class A sighting. So again, I'll put a link to this in the show notes. We're not going to read this whole thing or go over all of it because, as we've learned with Benjamin C. from the BFRO, God love him, the dude does his homework and he's extremely thorough. So let me just read the observation because it's interesting here. About 38 years ago, in 1987, late September or early October at around 10:30, 11 o'clock p.m., I was riding in a car with a friend at the time on Barnes Lane in Center County, PA, not far from the fish hatchery on Spring Creek Road.
Not far from the sheets over there,
Not
too.
far from the sheets. It's right there. This is all the same area. And oh God, we need to go like tomorrow.
We haven't been fishing out there in about 4 years
I
together. You
know
realize
it's a
that?
crime. Yeah,
It is.
we need to make that happen. Okay, so he says I can't recall the name of the guy I was with, and we'll get to that later. Make note of that. Can't recall the name of the guy I was with. I believe his car was about a 1979 Dodge Aspen two-door, silver with red interior.
I'm really glad he clarified what the interior
I
color
know,
was because
right?
that's going to make a big difference in all the rest of the
Yeah,
events that are about to transpire.
right. Um, I love car guys. So silver with red interior, if memory serves me correctly. We were just out for a late night cruise, killing time and listening to music. Sounds great. What do you think they were listening to in 1987 in on Spring Creek Road? Do you think
1987. I
on a
want to.
night cruise? Yeah, like you're cruising with your buds at night.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I mean, this is gonna. We got to play demographic game here. Like, how old is the dude? 1987. I'm guessing these are the actions of somebody between 17 and 25,
Right,
right? Okay.
right.
Okay.
I would say yeah, yeah.
Gosh, 1987. I want to say we haven't yet hit peak Bon Jovi because I think that
Mm-hmm.
comes out with the Young Gun sound or
Right, which is a
Young
little later. Yeah, yeah.
Young
Young
Gun
Guns. Yeah,
soundtrack.
it was
Young
Young Guns.
Blood
Yeah.
is the hockey movie with Rob
Right,
Lowe and
right.
Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves, also
Hmm.
starring Peter Zezel and a
Also,
couple.
also,
Yeah,
also a classic. Yeah.
very much a classic. I can still quote it. Anyway, I'm gonna go. You know what? I'm gonna go with Judas Priest.
Judas Priest. Okay, no,
Judas
that's
Priest.
that's 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 respectable. I'm gonna go with Here I Go Again by Whitesnake, I think.
I
I just
think that's later.
It might be later.
I
You
think
you,
that's
you
like
might be right.
88.
Yeah,
I
you might
need
be right.
to hold up
In
now.
my head but in my head that's the song that's playing as they're driving this two-door Aspen.
That was 82, so
Oh,
that's
really? It
definitely
was that
possible.
early.
I just remember the video from being a kid,
I wouldn't have
and
thought that was that early. I thought that was later. Okay.
yeah, I thought it was
Anyway,
too. But
anyway,
anyway,
we're heading down from Spring Creek Road toward Rock Road on what was just a mostly dirt road that wasn't traveled much. We weren't going fast, just riding around. We came up the hill from Spring Creek Road and got up on the level part of the road. We know exactly where that is. With what was farm fields on our right side and what I believe was a state prison ground on our left, Rockview Prison Ground.
indeed
Also,
it
it
is.
is. He remembers correctly. Also now state game lands 333, lucky threes as we call them. This is not a populated area. Was not a populated area as it is today, although still rural considering it's between Bellefonte and State College. There was an old apple orchard on the property. To our left, it had been part of the prison grounds in the vicinity. There was no traffic, no houses to speak of on the road compared to what's there today. He's talking about this in November 2025. I was looking out the passenger side window at the lights of the houses that I could make out on the top of the ridge over there on Seabrook Road. When the guy driving slammed on the brakes and said, "WTF is that?" I looked out the windshield to see an enormous, and I mean enormous creature stepping out of the brush from the right side of the road right in front of us. It was huge. I remember feeling like I was looking more than directly at it. Its arms and chest were just huge. It had a face kind of like something between a gorilla and a man. It looked right at us as it had stepped out in front of us about 40 feet away at most. I remember saying, "What the hell is that?" It immediately took a couple of strides and covered the distance of the road and onto the grass berm and just stepped right over the barbed wire fence like it was nothing. Like the whole thing happened so damn fast we couldn't process what the heck we just saw. It was huge, broad chest, massive legs, hairy, dark brown hair, but his face seemed kind of grayish. It was making strides. I remember seeing that its left leg was planted. It was just there, and then it wasn't. It was moving fast, but not running. It was upright on 2 feet. It was absolutely not a bear or a deer, and it must have been over 7 feet tall. Its chest was just so high up, it was kind of out of the direct beams of the headlights on the car. The arms and shoulders were just massive. The chest was broad and thick, way bigger than any man I've ever seen. Its eyes seemed open like it was startled, but immediately looked like it was pissed that we had interrupted it. So they
Interrupted it doing what?
doing what? I guess just out on its night hike.
It was
So
definitely listening to Slade.
um, so this is John from the first report. So this is where it kind of gets even crazier. So, and this is why I like talking about this stuff is important. I'm gonna paraphrase a lot of what Benjamin covers here, but basically what happened was, like I mentioned, we had that I-80 road crossing back in October of last year. This report came in from John, and as Benjamin C was working it, he noticed that there was another report that came in submitted by a gentleman named Wayne that sounded, very similar kind of thing. He starts looking into it. Turns out these two dudes reported this report after hearing the I-80 road crossing thing. So both guys from the car independently submitted
And he
reports.
couldn't, that's why he said why he couldn't remember who he was in the
He
car
couldn't
with.
remember, yeah. And then so he reaches out to both of them, and they're like, "Oh heck yeah, that's like
Yeah, I
now I
knew
know,
him
yeah,
back in high school or
right,
whatever.
exactly." So like kind of like corroborating evidence that showed up,
That is actually really interesting aspect to this story.
right? Right. So it's like, you're talking about this happening, 40 years ago.
Well, it's also like
Almost.
that sort of corroboration doesn't sound like something that anybody would think to plan. Like, oh, if we pretend like I can't remember, like
Right.
that does give
That's
some real credence.
right, exactly. And like not saying again, like anything could be faked, but it seems legit. And again, the other gentleman, Wayne, his sighting, how he describes it is very similar, but it's not exactly the same. It's not like his like the things that he kind of keys in on, are different. Because like again, we've talked about that, especially with the invisible gorilla and everything else. Like we do remember different things. Like we can both have the same experience.
Well,
And
when they were talking about in the Presque Isle beach
mhm,
story, and they were talking about discrepancies between the two
absolutely.
people's different things, I almost said invisible gorilla,
Yeah.
but
Right.
I restrained myself.
Right. And that's the thing. And both of them, both of the gentlemen, John and Wayne, like say that like, they're not like into this necessarily. They're not both they just happen to turn into Bigfoot hunters and now they're just happen to, submit this report kind of thing. Um, But so Benjamin does go into like incredible detail comparing both of the reports and everything and talking to these witnesses. And again, does a great job. I should just reach out to Ben. I feel
That's
like
actually a really good
it's a really good
idea.
idea because like it's stuff like this, Nick, that like you know that, for all the weird stuff I'm into, like I'm not a flesh and blood Bigfoot guy. That's not
And
my
that surprises me just because
right.
again, I don't buy the Bigfoot story to
Right.
start with, but it is intriguing. It is
It
like I
is.
had that whole episode where I talked about different animals that were thought to
Hmm.
be cryptids, but were
Precisely.
dim.
Yeah.
Well, and even just like some large mammals that
Hmm.
were only
Hmm.
recently discovered. So I, 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 I guess there's some possibility, but when I hear the multi-dimensional thing, when I
Right.
hear the aquatic Bigfoot, like I just like
I
it's
know.
getting silly.
I know. Well, but it's funny. Like again, I always say like I think like I'm of like the high strangeness Bigfoot camp where like I think that people are seeing things, but I don't think it's necessarily a flesh and blood creature. However, when I hear reports like this, and when we get, basically four corroborating reports from different people who don't know each other in like a quarter-mile stretch of road over
Yes.
40 years. And at the end of that ravine, we have another prominent sighting just from last year. Like, like I can understand why flesh and blood people are into this. Like,
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
it's like you could talk about this being a travel corridor for these things, and it kind of makes sense. Like, and it's I generally believe people. Like I don't think people are necessarily making stuff up. I think people are seeing these things, and I really appreciate the level of detail, not only in this case, but we even talk about the Blue Book stuff, which gets people bashed on like crazy. But like, I think a lot of times when people are using a scientific paradigm to put that lens over, these really strange events, I appreciate people at least taking it seriously and like trying to do good work and not passing judgment necessarily. Uh,
I'll agree to all that.
yeah, and so like that makes me feel good about the world. So that's kind of my interpretation of this tonight. Um, can I tell you about something else
Absolutely.
as we're wrapping up that makes me feel good about the world? Because I feel like we need a little bit of that
Need
right
a
now.
lot of that right now.
So one of the things that always reminds me about Presque Isle is on more than one occasion up there, I had to stop and help turtles cross the road. And we've had this conversation before. I know me and you personally, at least. I've all said if I ever die on the road from trying to help a turtle across the road, no one should be surprised. It's happened too many times in my life.
It's a good death.
It is a good death. Yeah, it is. It is the end of Legends of the Fall. It is Brad Pitt fighting a bear.
That is
It's
the second time I've had a conversation, or I had a whole conversation with a woman I work with about that movie
oh, I love
recently.
it. I could talk about it all night. But so, but anyway, so like I have a very hard time not helping turtles on busy roads. So I'm coming back from I was down south and everything, and I was coming up this evening back to my place. And as I'm coming down the road, I see something. I see something. I'm like, "What the hell is that?" And I get close, and I realize it's a snapping turtle trying to cross the road.
Like one
Like
of them real big ones
it's a
with the
big
spiky
one.
shell.
It is a big
Yeah.
snapping turtle. But I have this triaxle behind me, and it is not into me slowing down. So I turn my flashers on and everything, and I slow down and I get around the turtle kind of thing. But this stupid triaxle from the sand place over here is like riding me. And so I don't stop because I'm just like, there's too much traffic. There's tons of traffic coming the other direction. I get about a quarter mile down the road and I'm like, I have to turn around and go try and help this turtle. Like I can't, I won't be able to live with myself. So I turn around and I'm coming back and there's so much traffic and I'm just like, someone has already hit this turtle. It's been like 45 seconds. Someone's already hit this turtle. I'm too late. I should have just stopped, yada, yada. And I get back and there's already some lady stopped in her Jeep carrying this thing across the road and like traffic has stopped. And that really that like made my day. I was like, you know what? Like humans are good, you know,
Absolutely.
like so if you have a story about seeing Bigfoot on a quarter-mile stretch of Spring Creek Road in Bellefonte, or if you are looped into
Turtle rescue on the roads of America.
I was gonna say, if you're real passionate about turtle rescue and want to talk to someone who gets it, we're here for you. But yeah, if you want to reach out, if you have any thoughts, like Dan, who emailed in earlier, like you were saying, Nick, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube at the Ghost Furnace Podcast, or you can simply send us an email at the Ghost Furnace Podcast at gmail.com.
And there's a good chance we will read it. So
Yes.
Thanks again, Dave, for the email.